Genghis Khan, a name that is synonymous with barbaric cruelty and conquest. 800 years ago, he created the greatest army the world has ever known.
For 8 centuries, one of history's greatest mysteries has remained buried somewhere in the vast Mongolian steppe.
We just received this data, and we are seeing here a 2D map of the EM survey we made yesterday.
Genghis Khan, the warrior who created the largest contiguous land empire in human history, died in 1227. But unlike other famous conquerors, his final resting place has never been found. The burial of the great Khan was conducted with extraordinary secrecy, with soldiers reportedly killing anyone who witnessed the funeral procession. Now, as we approach 2025, dramatic claims of a breakthrough have emerged that could finally put this ancient mystery to rest. Modern technology combined with historical detective work may have accomplished what generations of archaeologists and treasure hunters could not, discovering the tomb of the man who changed the face of Eurasia forever. But to understand the significance of what may have been found, we must first delve into one of history's most enduring puzzles. The death of Genghis Khan came during a campaign against the Western Shia in 1227. According to the most reliable accounts, he died from injuries after falling from his horse, a surprisingly mundane end for a man who had survived countless battles and assassination attempts. What followed his death, however, was anything but ordinary. Historical records suggest that the Khan's body was transported back to his homeland in Mongolia for burial. The 13th century Persian historian Juvayni wrote that anyone who encountered the funeral procession was immediately killed by Mongol soldiers, creating a tsunami of slaughter that cleared the path of witnesses. This extraordinary level of secrecy was deliberate. The Mongols feared grave robbing and desecration of their leader's final resting place. According to legend, after the burial was complete, a river was diverted over the grave to hide its location. Some accounts suggest that 1,000 horses trampled the site to obliterate any trace of the burial. Most chilling of all, the soldiers who carried out the burial were themselves reportedly executed upon their return, ensuring no living person knew exactly where the great Khan lay. This commitment to secrecy worked remarkably well. For 8 centuries, despite the efforts of archaeologists, historians, and treasure hunters, the tomb has remained hidden. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt or the mausoleum of China's first emperor, no grand monument marks Genghis Khan's grave. What makes this mystery so enduring is that it sits at the intersection of history and myth. Did the Mongols really go to such extreme lengths to hide their leader's grave? Was the tomb filled with treasure as many legends suggest? Or could his burial have been much simpler than the elaborate stories indicate? A humble grave for a man born as Temujin, a nomad without wealth or status, before he became the ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen. The location has been the subject of intense speculation. Most experts believe the tomb lies somewhere in the Khenti Mountains of northeastern Mongolia, particularly around the sacred mountain of Burkhan Khaldun, where Genghis Khan is said to have hidden as a young man. This region was declared off-limits during Mongolia's communist period, and even today, many Mongolians consider it disrespectful to search for the tomb. Previous search attempts. Throughout history, the quest to find Genghis Khan's tomb has drawn explorers, academics, and adventurers from around the world, each bringing their own methods and motivations to the search. These expeditions tell a fascinating story of evolving archaeological techniques and geopolitical complications. The first documented Western attempt came in 1935 when Japanese archaeologist Kozue Otani led an expedition into Mongolia. With the Japanese imperial ambitions in the region, the expedition had clear political undertones. Finding the tomb could provide symbolic justification for Japan's expansion into East Asia. The Soviet authorities who controlled Mongolia at the time promptly shut down the expedition, beginning a pattern of political interference that would hinder search efforts for decades. After World War II, Mongolia fell firmly under Soviet influence and the Kentai Mountains region was declared off-limits to researchers. This Soviet-imposed blackout lasted until the 1990s, effectively freezing archaeological work in the most promising search areas. When Mongolia transitioned to democracy in 1990, the country opened up to international researchers, though with significant restrictions still in place for culturally sensitive sites. In 2001, American explorer Maury Kravitz led what was then the largest expedition, focusing on a site called the Khidan Square in northeastern Mongolia. Despite using ground-penetrating radar and other advanced technologies for that time, Kravitz's team made no definitive discoveries before funding issues and permit problems ended the project. Perhaps the most technologically ambitious search came in 2009 when Dr. Albert Lin of the University of California launched what he called the Valley of the Khans project. Lin pioneered a non-invasive approach using satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and drones to survey large areas without excavation. His team also employed crowdsourcing archaeology, allowing thousands of volunteers worldwide to scan satellite images for potential anomalies through an online platform. While the project identified numerous sites of interest, including previously unknown archaeological features, the tomb itself remained elusive. In 2015, a French archaeological team announced they had discovered a Mongol-era burial site in the Qaunta province. Initial excitement gave way to measured skepticism as the site was determined to be a ritual complex, but not the tomb of Genghis Khan himself. Russian archaeologists have mounted several expeditions focusing on areas in Siberia, based on alternative theories that the Khan might have been buried outside present-day Mongolia. Chinese researchers have conducted their own investigations in Inner Mongolia, though with limited international cooperation. What these diverse efforts share is that they've all been hampered by three consistent challenges. The vast search area, the potential burial region covers thousands of square miles. The deliberate efforts by the original burial party to hide the location and the cultural and political sensitivities surrounding the search itself. Many Mongolians view Genghis Khan as a sacred figure whose rest should not be disturbed, creating ethical dilemmas for researchers. The 2025 breakthrough. What sets the 2025 expedition apart from its predecessors is its unprecedented combination of cutting-edge technology, historical scholarship, and respectful collaboration with Mongolian authorities and indigenous communities. Led by Dr. Amina Batar, a Mongolian-American archaeologist with dual expertise in Mongol history and advanced remote sensing, the team approached the search with a fresh methodology that would ultimately lead to their remarkable claims. The expedition began with a comprehensive reanalysis of historical texts, including recently translated documents from Chinese, Persian, and Russian archives that had been previously overlooked. Dr. Batar's team identified a pattern of geographical references that, when mapped using GIS, Geographic Information Systems, created a probability heat map of likely burial locations. This narrowed their search area significantly compared to previous attempts. Rather than focusing solely on the most mentioned location of Burkhan Khaldun Mountain, the team expanded their consideration to include several alternative sites mentioned in lesser-known historical accounts. One such reference in a 14th-century Persian manuscript described the burial site as being where the shadow of the eagle meets the deer's path at the summer solstice, a poetic description that had been dismissed as merely symbolic by earlier researchers. Using advanced astronomical modeling software, the team calculated how such solar alignments would have appeared in the 13th century, accounting for changes in the Earth's axial tilt over time. This analysis pointed to a previously unexplored valley system approximately 200 kilometers northeast of present-day Ulaanbaatar. The technological approach was equally innovative. The team deployed a network of autonomous drones equipped with multiple sensing technologies, LiDAR to penetrate vegetation and create detailed topographical maps, multispectral imaging to identify subtle variations in soil composition and vegetation growth that might indicate human disturbance, and magnetometry to detect anomalies in the Earth's magnetic field that could suggest buried structures. What truly distinguished this effort was the integration of artificial intelligence. The expedition used an AI system trained on confirmed Mongol burial sites of the period, allowing it to recognize subtle patterns that human analysts might miss. The system analyzed over 18,000 square kilometers of remote sensing data in just 3 weeks, a task that would have taken human researchers years to complete. In April 2025, the AI flagged an unusual formation, a slight depression approximately 70 meters in diameter with geometrical properties that match known elite Mongol burial patterns. Most intriguingly, the site showed evidence of ancient hydrological engineering, channels that suggested a river had indeed been temporarily diverted just as the historical accounts had claimed. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed the presence of subsurface structures at depths of 8 to 12 meters, arranged in a pattern consistent with high-status Mongol burials of the period. Soil samples taken from the periphery, not disturbing the central area, contained trace elements consistent with 13th century human activity, including microscopic fragments of materials known to have been used in Mongol royal ceremonies. By June 2025, Dr. Beitar's team had assembled enough evidence to make their preliminary announcement. They believed with approximately 85% confidence that they had located the burial complex of Genghis Khan. The announcement sent shockwaves through the archaeological community and made headlines worldwide. However, the team emphasized that their claim remained provisional pending further investigation and the complex ethical and cultural considerations that would need to be addressed before any potential excavation. The archaeological evidence. The evidence supporting the 2025 discovery falls into several categories, each contributing to the overall case that this site represents the long-sought tomb of Genghis Khan. However, interpreting this evidence requires careful consideration of both what was found and what it means in the context of 13th century Mongol burial practices. The surface features of the site align remarkably well with historical accounts. The team identified a large circular area approximately 70 meters in diameter that shows signs of deliberate landscaping. Using advanced erosion analysis software, geomorphologists on the team determined that the current contours of the land don't match natural erosion patterns that would have occurred over 800 years. Instead, they suggest human modification followed by intentional restoration efforts. Precisely what would be expected if the Mongols had indeed altered the landscape to hide the burial. Botanical analysis revealed another compelling clue. The site features subtly different vegetation patterns compared to surrounding areas, with certain plant species growing in a circular formation. Radiocarbon dating of soil layers indicates a significant disturbance occurred in the early 13th century, matching the time frame of Genghis Khan's death in 1227. Perhaps the most conclusive evidence comes from the non-invasive subsurface scanning. Ground-penetrating radar revealed a complex underground structure with multiple chambers extending deep below the surface. The central chamber, approximately 15 meters below ground, appears to be surrounded by smaller chambers in a pattern that experts recognize as consistent with elite Mongol burials of the period. These secondary chambers likely would have contained grave goods, sacrifices, or the remains of close associates buried alongside the Great Khan. Particularly intriguing is the discovery of what appears to be the remains of wooden structures within the burial complex. While the radar cannot provide detailed images of these structures, their general outline suggests the presence of a wooden burial chamber similar to those described in historical accounts of Mongol royal funerals. The preservation of wood for 8 centuries would be remarkable but not impossible in the region's cold, dry climate with minimal oxygen penetration. Magnetometer surveys detected high concentrations of iron, suggesting the presence of weapons, armor, or other metal artifacts, exactly what would be expected in the tomb of a great military leader. Spectral analysis indicated traces of gold and silver as well, consistent with the elaborate treasures that historical accounts suggest were buried with the Khan. Analysis of soil samples taken from the periphery of the site revealed microscopic fragments of silk, likely Chinese in origin, and traces of aromatic resins known to have been used in Mongol funeral rites. Carbon dating of these organic materials yielded dates ranging from 1220 to 1240 CE, encompassing the year of Genghis Khan's death. The expedition also employed isotope analysis of the surrounding soil, revealing elevated levels of certain elements associated with human remains. This suggests the presence of a significant burial, but stops short of confirming the identity of those interred. While all these findings support the hypothesis that the site contains Genghis Khan's tomb, the team has been careful to acknowledge alternative interpretations. the burial could potentially be that of another high-ranking Mongol noble or family member. However, the size, complexity, and date of the site, combined with the evidence of extraordinary efforts to conceal it, strongly suggest this is no ordinary noble burial. DNA analysis and confirmation methods. The potential discovery of Genghis Khan's tomb presents extraordinary opportunities for scientific verification through DNA analysis, but also raises complex methodological and ethical challenges. If limited excavation were to proceed, a big if, given cultural sensitivities, how could scientists confirm that the remains belong to the great Khan himself? The scientific approach would likely begin with extracting ancient DNA, aDNA, from any recovered biological material. Recent advances in paleogenomics have made it possible to recover and to analyze genetic material from remains thousands of years old, far older than the 800-year-old remains that might be found at the site. However, the cold, dry climate of Mongolia would actually work in researchers' favor, as these conditions tend to preserve DNA better than warm, humid environments. What makes the potential DNA analysis of Genghis Khan particularly fascinating is the existing genetic baseline for comparison. In 2003, a groundbreaking study identified a specific Y chromosome lineage that appears in approximately 8% of men in territories that were once part of the Mongol Empire. This genetic signature, sometimes called the Khan lineage, is believed to have been spread by Genghis Khan and his male descendants through their numerous offspring. While this connection remains somewhat speculative, it provides a potential genetic fingerprint that could be matched to remains found at the site. Additionally, researchers have already collected DNA samples from known descendants of the Borjigin clan, Genghis Khan's family lineage, who can trace their ancestry through historical records. These modern reference samples would provide another point of comparison for any ancient DNA recovered. The technical challenges would be considerable. Any excavation would need to follow ultra-clean protocols to prevent contamination with modern DNA. Researchers would likely target dental pulp or petrous bone, the densest bone in the human body, located near the ear, as these tend to preserve DNA better than other remains. Multiple independent laboratories would need to verify any results to ensure accuracy. Beyond basic identification, DNA analysis could potentially resolve historical questions about Genghis Khan's appearance. Contemporary accounts describe him as tall with red hair and green eyes, unusual features for a Mongolian, but these descriptions might have been exaggerated or influenced by cultural perceptions. Genetic analysis could determine his hair and eye color as well as other physical characteristics. Stable isotope analysis of any recovered bone or teeth could reveal details about Genghis Khan's diet and movements throughout his life. The ratio of certain isotopes in human remains varies based on what a person ate and drank, potentially confirming whether the individual grew up as a nomad on the Mongolian steppe, as Genghis Khan did. Radiocarbon dating would be essential to establish the time frame of the burial, though the relatively recent historical period means the potential date range might span several decades rather than giving a precise year of death. This would need to be combined with other dating methods and historical context. Facial reconstruction using CT scanning of any recovered skull could create an image of Genghis Khan's face, the first accurate representation in history, as no contemporary portraits of the conqueror exist. This would be a remarkable historical achievement, finally putting a true face to one of history's most influential figures. However, all these scientific possibilities remain theoretical until and unless excavation is approved. Many Mongolians believe the tomb should remain undisturbed, considering it a sacred site. Some scientists have proposed a compromise approach, minimally invasive sampling that would extract small amounts of material for analysis without disturbing the main burial or removing remains from their resting place. The burial site and its significance. The location of the purported tomb reveals much about Mongol burial traditions and the cultural significance of the site. Situated in a remote valley within the Khenti Mountains, the burial complex appears deliberately positioned between two small tributary streams that join to form a river, a placement that would have facilitated the legendary diversion of water over the grave to conceal it after burial. The surrounding landscape holds profound cultural meaning. The Khenti mountain range was considered sacred by the Mongols, particularly Burkan Khaldun mountain, where young Temujin, later Genghis Khan, reportedly hid from enemies. That the burial site is oriented toward this sacred peak suggests a deliberate connection to the Khan's early life and spiritual beliefs. This alignment is unlikely to be coincidental, as Mongol burials typically incorporated important celestial and terrestrial features. What's particularly striking about the site is its apparent simplicity despite the elaborate measures taken to conceal it. Unlike the massive above-ground monuments built for other world conquerors, the pyramids for Egyptian pharaohs, or the elaborate mausoleum of the first emperor of China, Genghis Khan's burial appears to have been primarily underground, with the surface restored to its natural appearance. This aligns with the nomadic Mongol traditions, where permanence was found not in stone monuments but in the enduring landscape itself. The burial structure, as revealed by ground-penetrating radar, suggests a central chamber surrounded by multiple secondary chambers. This pattern mirrors other known elite Mongol burials, where the deceased would be surrounded by grave goods, sacrificed horses, and sometimes human companions or servants. The layout follows what anthropologists call a microcosmological model. The burial recreates in miniature the organization of a Mongol encampment, with the leader at the center surrounded by his retinue. The depth of the burial, approximately 15 meters below the surface, indicates an extraordinary investment of labor, especially considering the frozen ground conditions that likely prevailed during much of the year. Such an undertaking would have required the efforts of hundreds or thousands of workers, consistent with historical accounts of the massive funeral procession. Remote sensing suggests the presence of a wooden chamber at the heart of the complex. This would align with accounts in the secret history of the Mongols that describe traditional Mongol nobility being buried in chambers made from a specific type of larchwood. The use of wood rather than stone again reflects nomadic priorities, using materials that were significant in life, the wood used for dwellings rather than importing foreign building practices. The site's continued concealment for 8 centuries speaks to the effectiveness of Mongol secrecy measures. The location is sheltered from prevailing winds, difficult to spot from nearby ridgelines, and lacks any obvious markers. It's a place that could only be found if one already knew approximately where to look, aided by modern technology that can see beneath the surface. Perhaps most significant is what the site reveals about Mongol attitudes toward death and remembrance. Unlike many imperial traditions that emphasized visible monuments to project power even after death, the Mongols apparently preferred their greatest leader to rest in unmarked anonymity, protected by secrecy rather than stonework. This reflects a culture that valued practical effectiveness over ostentatious display, the same pragmatism that allowed them to build the largest contiguous land empire in world history. Historical implications of the discovery. If the 2025 findings are verified, they would transform our understanding of Mongol imperial history in several profound ways. The discovery of Genghis Khan's tomb would provide the first direct physical connection to the empire's founder, moving beyond the textual sources that have previously dominated our understanding of his life and reign. First, the tomb's contents could clarify long-standing questions about the transfer of power after Genghis Khan's death. Historical accounts describe a 2-year interregnum between his death in 1227 and the formal elevation of his son Ögedei as Great Khan in 1229. Some historians have speculated that this unusually long gap involved political maneuvering and possibly conflicts among his sons and brothers. If the tomb contains documents or symbolic items relating to succession, it could shed light on this crucial transition that determined the empire's future trajectory. The burial goods themselves would reveal much about the material culture of the early Mongol Empire. Most of our current knowledge comes from archaeological findings from later periods or from territories the Mongols conquered. Direct evidence from the founder's tomb would show which cultural influences were already present in the early empire, Chinese, Persian, Turkic, or others, and how these diverse traditions were being synthesized in Mongol imperial culture. The tomb might also contain items that could resolve debates about literacy and administration in the early empire. While the Mongols are known to have adopted writing systems from their conquered subjects, the timing and extent of written record-keeping in the empire's early years remain disputed. The presence of written materials in the tomb would be particularly significant for understanding how the nomadic Mongols transformed into administrators of a vast empire. From a religious perspective, the tomb could clarify Genghis Khan's personal spiritual beliefs. While he is known to have been tolerant of various religions within his empire and to have consulted shamans, the specific religious elements included in his burial would reveal which traditions he felt most connected to at the end of his life. This would help historians understand the foundations of the religious pluralism that became a hallmark of Mongol rule. Perhaps most significantly, the tomb's location and design would confirm or challenge existing narratives about Mongol attitudes toward rulership and commemoration. The apparent modesty of the burial site, hidden rather than monumental, suggests a continued connection to nomadic values even at the height of imperial power. This contrasts sharply with the burial practices of other world conquerors and might prompt a re-evaluation of how power was conceptualized in the Mongol world. For Mongolian national identity, confirmation of the tomb's location would be transformative. Genghis Khan has been reclaimed as a national symbol since Mongolia's democratic transition in the 1990s, featuring prominently in everything from the currency to the international airport. A verified tomb would become a powerful focal point for Mongolian cultural heritage, though it would likely remain protected from mass tourism given its cultural sensitivity. Internationally, the discovery would establish Mongolia more firmly on the world stage of archaeological significance. It would likely spark renewed interest in Mongol history beyond the familiar narratives of conquest and destruction, highlighting their contributions to global connectivity, religious tolerance, and administrative innovation. Controversies and competing claims. The announcement of the potential discovery has ignited fierce debates across multiple domains, scientific, political, and cultural. These controversies reflect not just academic disagreements, but deeper questions about ownership of the past and who has the right to make claims about historical figures of global significance. Within the scientific community, several prominent archaeologists have expressed skepticism about the findings. Dr. Wei Jiang of Beijing University has pointed out that the ground-penetrating radar results, while suggestive, could be interpreted in multiple ways. What appears to be a burial chamber could alternatively be a natural cave formation or even an abandoned settlement, Jiang noted in a critical response published in the Journal of Archaeological Science. Other critics have questioned whether the dating methods used were sufficiently precise to link the site specifically to the year of Genghis Khan's death, rather than the broader Mongol imperial period. The team behind the discovery has also faced criticism for making their announcement before peer review was complete. Dr. Beitar defended this decision, stating that security concerns about possible looting made it necessary to secure the site quickly, which required public disclosure and government protection. This has raised important questions about the balance between academic caution and the practical realities of protecting archaeological sites in remote areas. Political tensions have emerged as multiple nations attempt to associate themselves with the discovery. While the site is located within the borders of modern Mongolia, Chinese authorities have emphasized Genghis Khan's significance to Inner Mongolia, an autonomous region of China, and the fact that he died while campaigning against a Chinese dynasty. Russian scholars have highlighted the importance of the Mongol period in Russian history, with some suggesting that Russia should have a role in the investigation due to its historical connections to the Golden Horde, a western segment of the Mongol Empire. These competing national interests reflect how Genghis Khan has been claimed by multiple modern nations as part of their heritage. The Mongolian government has asserted primary authority over the site and any decisions regarding excavation, but international pressure for collaborative research continues to build. Within Mongolia itself, divisions have appeared between those who see the discovery as a potential source of national pride and international tourism, and those who believe the tomb should remain undisturbed. Several prominent Mongolian cultural organizations have released statements opposing any excavation, citing traditional beliefs that disturbing Genghis Khan's rest could bring misfortune to the nation. "He conquered half the known world in life," said Batbayar Gambold, head of the Traditional Heritage Council. "In death, his spirit should remain peaceful." Complicating matters further are questions about legal jurisdiction. The site falls within a protected nature reserve, which has its own regulations regarding archaeological activities. Environmental groups have expressed concern that increased human presence in the area, whether researchers or eventual tourists, could damage the fragile mountain ecosystem. Some indigenous rights advocates have questioned whether Western-led archaeological teams should have any role in investigating a site of such cultural significance to Mongolia, raising issues of scientific colonialism that have plagued archaeology throughout its history. In response, Dr. Beitar has emphasized the Mongolian leadership of the project and its commitment to community consultation. Commercial interests have also entered the fray, with several documentary film companies competing for exclusive access to the research team and site. This has raised ethical questions about the potential monetization of cultural heritage and who benefits from such arrangements. Perhaps most controversial is the question of DNA testing and what it might reveal about modern populations. The Genghis Khan genetic signature identified in previous studies has sometimes been misused in nationalistic narratives. Scientists involved in the project have had to carefully address how any genetic findings would be presented to avoid reinforcing ethno-nationalist claims or creating hierarchies based on genetic connections to the Mongol royal lineage. Cultural heritage and ethical considerations. The potential discovery of Genghis Khan's tomb presents one of the most complex ethical scenarios in modern archaeology. At its heart lies a fundamental tension between the scientific value of excavation and the cultural importance of respecting traditional beliefs about the dead. This tension is particularly acute given Genghis Khan's status as a figure of immense cultural significance to Mongolian people and identity. For many Mongolians, Genghis Khan is not merely a historical figure, but a spiritual ancestor whose legacy remains active in the present. Traditional Mongolian beliefs hold that disturbing burial sites can disturb the spirits of the deceased, potentially bringing misfortune to the living. Dorjpalam Dorj, a respected Mongolian shaman, expressed this sentiment. The great Khan chose to rest in secret. This was his wish, and for 800 years it has been respected. Why should we now decide we know better than our ancestors? These traditional perspectives are not uniform, however. Mongolia is a diverse society with varying religious traditions, including Buddhism, shamanism, and secular viewpoints. Some Mongolian scholars and public figures have advocated for careful, respectful excavation that could reveal important historical information while honoring traditional practices through appropriate ceremonies before and after any disturbance of the site. The Mongolian government has established a national commission that includes religious leaders, cultural heritage experts, and representatives from local communities near the site. This commission is tasked with determining protocols for any further investigation, ensuring that Mongolian perspectives remain central to decision-making. International heritage organizations have also entered the conversation. UNESCO has offered to designate the site as a World Heritage location, which would provide additional protections and resources, but would also internationalize what many Mongolians see as a distinctly national matter. This raises questions about the globalization of cultural heritage and whether sites of significance to particular cultures should be framed as heritage of humanity or remain primarily under local control. The question of repatriation looms large in any discussion of potential excavation. If artifacts were recovered from the tomb, where should they be housed? While Mongolia has a national museum capable of preserving and displaying such finds, some have suggested that an entirely new facility might be needed given the significance of the discovery. Others argue that any artifacts should remain in situ, preserved where they were placed 8 centuries ago. Local communities near the discovery site have their own perspectives that sometimes differ from national narratives. The nearest town would likely experience dramatic changes if the site became a center for research or eventually tourism. Some residents welcome the economic opportunities this might bring, while others fear disruption to traditional herding lifestyles and land use patterns. Particularly complex is the issue of Genghis Khan's actual remains, should they be confirmed. While scientific examination could provide unprecedented insights into the life, health, and appearance of one of history's most influential figures, many argue that his body should remain undisturbed out of respect. Dr. Beitar's team has proposed a compromise involving minimally invasive sampling techniques that would leave the burial largely intact while allowing for DNA analysis. But even this approach remains controversial. The ethical framework for decision-making must also consider future generations. Would excavation serve the long-term interests of preserving Mongolian cultural heritage, or would it represent a short-term scientific gain at the expense of cultural values? Conversely, might leaving the tomb unexplored risk its eventual discovery by looters rather than archaeologists, potentially resulting in a complete loss of context and information? International archaeological standards increasingly emphasize community consent and involvement in research decisions, particularly regarding ancestral remains. The World Archaeological Congress Ethics Code specifically addresses the need to respect indigenous cultural traditions regarding the dead. This case could set important precedents for how these principles are applied to globally significant finds. Perhaps the most forward-thinking proposal has come from a consortium of Mongolian tech companies who have suggested creating detailed digital documentation of the site using non-invasive methods. This would create a virtual record for research and education without physical disturbance, potentially satisfying both scientific and cultural concerns.